Hello, my name is Lizzie Karen, and this is part one of a multi-part series on the story of a man I knew as Tehut, but who I think was later known as Thoth or Hermes. I don't know exactly where he was originally from, but I suspect the Mediterranean or the Mesopotamian area. The origins of his original culture are a mystery that even fascinated the people of Tantal. In the story, you will even hear mention of some great teacher of a far-off land. And I know absolutely nothing of this other than what I'm going to tell you about today, but boy does it fascinate me, and I really wish I knew more. As for the story, some of it I get firsthand, but other parts are just memories of common knowledge amongst my people, or even the things that Ulran, my brother, told me. But before I start, in case you are new to my channel, it's best that I give you a quick introduction. Otherwise, you might be expecting something completely different. So this channel is based on the many regressions that I've had throughout my life. So I'm retired now, so being as old as I am, 59, I have much to tell you. I was born with memories of my past life, which I would talk about as early as I can remember. My family were not too happy with me talking about it, so I learnt to keep quiet about it. Anyway, nevertheless, when I go to sleep, I return to an amazing place called Tantal. I personally think it's Atlantis, hence the name of the channel, Dreams of Atlantis. So now we can get on with the story of Tehut. Tehut was my brother's best friend. Tehut was in his 50s when they met, and my brother was barely 20, but it was a friendship that would span millennia. We were all living in a beautiful little village called Kron, set on a massive lake, but this idyllic location was far from perfect, as there were raiders nearby that would regularly visit, terrorize everyone, steal what they could, carry off stuff and hurt us if we ever asked them to stop. And by hurt, I don't mean insult us. They were barbarians. They would kill, maim, or rape. So we just hid, and as long as we did that, we were usually physically unharmed. The story of Tehut started while Ulran, my brother, was searching for a better location for our people to move to. And this was just after he'd had his first major epiphany, which resulted in the levitational and flight technology that we had in Tantal. Ulran developed the first flying machine, and he used it to travel to faraway places in search of a new, safer location for us, his people. He was looking for a place where there were no primitives, but it wasn't easy, as humanity already spanned the globe. It was during one of these trips he came across an island where he saw a beautiful tower built of red blocks, or maybe they were red bricks, I don't know. But at the top of the tower was a light, or maybe it was a fire. It's all a bit vague. This is, as you know, all mostly secondhand to me, this part of it, so it's difficult for me to give any great detail. Ulran was surprised, actually, to find such a great civilization. He thought that his people, that is us, were the only people that were not primitive barbarians. He decided to land, and he did it a good distance away from the city, and he walked to the highest vantage point where he could see the place. The city was beautiful, but there were not many people, and as he got nearer, he saw great pits with bodies strewn about. He could see that the few people who were alive were not doing terribly well. They effectively were dying, he could see that. And Ulran didn't know why. And then suddenly a man approached him, speaking in a language he didn't understand. He looked healthy enough, not like the others, but Ulran turned and quickly went back to his flying machine. The man followed. Ulran took off, and the man just stared pathetically as Ulran ascended. There was something about this man, a gentleness, a sadness, a great depth in his eyes, that made Ulran return, and Ulran signaled to him to come over, and the man got into the machine and they departed. The man, Tehut, wept, but was unable to express to Ulran what had happened to his people, or to express his appreciation for being rescued. Being obviously concerned for the safety of his own people, his family, for example, Ulran had a wife and at least one child by this time, I think. Anyway, Ulran took the man to a cave. It was a place that Ulran went often to think things out and work. No one else knew of this place, and even if they did, they couldn't reach it. Ulran had a well-stocked larder for such times of reclusive contemplation, and so they camped there for 2 weeks while Ulran tried to determine if the man, and indeed himself, now had whatever plague or disorder that the people of his new friend had. The 2 weeks they spent together cemented their friendship and enabled the two to learn a little of each other's language. It would seem that Ulran had discovered someone almost his intellectual equal. Ulran was a lovely person, but he struggled to think down to most people's level of thinking. But this was a man who was quick to learn and incredibly bright. We, his family, were very bright too, but we were not a patch on Ulran or on his friend Tehut. Tehut learned our language quickly. It turned out that Tahut was not actually living in that city. I think he said it was something like Kairos or something like that, when the plague or whatever it was struck. He had actually been called to study at the feet of the Great One in the Temple of Light in one of the other cities. I think the name of that place was something like Simbaya. The reason I think that is because that's a funny song, Kumbaya. Sounds a bit like it, but it's not kum at the start, it's sim. So I think the name of the city is Simbaya. So, yeah, I have a weird way of remembering things. But anyway, it was far away, and he'd been there studying for over 10 years. And it was from there that he was returning, and that was several days earlier, before Ulran came. He was returning with some others who'd also been away for quite some time. And as they all came near to shore, they could see the city and that there were some terrible things going on. So they weren't sure what to do, so they took their boat to a very nearby harbour, which was a fairly safe distance from the city, and decided to have a look at the situation from a different angle. As they came over the ridge by foot, it was clear that something was very, very wrong. Apparently, Tehut advised his companions to wait and not go into the city, at least a short time, while they could together determine what was actually happening. But his companions did not agree, and they immediately returned to their boats and sailed back around to the village. Tehut was wise. He knew that if it was a plague, he could not help them. He would just die with them. It was painful for him, but he stayed many days and watched, and more people were taken from their houses, clearly dead, and he knew he had no way to help. He was hoping to see some of the people recover, but once he had seen that only a few, in fact, remained at all, and his companions, the people who he'd returned with, were now also either dead or dying, he realized that he needed to leave the area, but no boat, and hence no way off without taking a really big chance of going into the city. That's when he saw Ulran fly over, and that's how he ended up returning with Ulran to his cave of contemplation. Once Ulran felt sure it was safe, they both came out of the cave and returned to my family. Tahut was instantly accepted by both my family and the village. Some years later, Tahut returned with Ulran to his original city. It was lifeless. They had a good look around. They were very careful, and they saw no one. It didn't look as if it had been disturbed at all since he'd last seen it. So the two of them took all the things that they thought were important or useful to our people in Tantal. I suspect that this is where many of the books came from that were around at the start of Tantal, but of that I'm just guessing. Tehut and Ulran were very close, but Tehut was older than even Ulran's parents. He was closer to the age of our grandmother, who was a widow. Tehut was very much enamored by our lovely grandmother. Even elderly, she was gorgeous. Within 10 years, Ulran had founded Tantal, what I think is Atlantis, and had also worked out how to prolong life. Not massively at this stage, but at least an extra 30 to 40 years. And later, after much work, he actually came up with the cure to aging, and those who took it returned to being about 25 or 30 in looks and in health. Tehut and our grandmother were happy to be early adopters, as you might guess. The love between them blossomed even more once they regained their youth. I'm sorry that I can't actually recall her name, because for the whole of my life, she was my grandmother, and that's what I called her. She was my grandmother because Ulran was my brother, so neither of us ever called her by any other name than the equivalent of grandma. Tahut was a very good-looking man, despite having a rather large nose. I can see him clearly in my mind's eye, but I guess his nose was really only large compared to the general features of my people. When I think about his nose compared to today, it was pretty normal. Anyway, his wisdom was unsurpassed, but he had a certain mystery about him. He often mentioned his teacher, the Great One, but said he could not return there, nor could he speak of where it was. So very little was ever said about the civilization that he came from, but there were the odd tiny hints and small comments, and I gathered that his city was actually just a small part of what had been a flourishing culture, but that some of the people had returned to primitive ways for some unknown reason, and that only the great temple retained the essence of what that civilization once had been. So it's not clear to me where this place was, or in fact what happened to the Great One, but Tahut once said that history has a habit of repeating itself, whatever that means. Ulran asked Tahut to be part of his new university, the Great University of Tantal, which, as it developed, was then later split into 12 universities. Initially, all of them were located within Tantal, and they were later split over 10 locations. So one location is Tantal, and there were 9 other locations around the world. Some of those locations have been relatively easy for me to work out. For example, Egypt is Kem, Athens is Neath, and a place called Thebe, I'm pretty sure, is in the British Isles. Maybe even Doggerland, but I'd recognize those white cliffs anywhere. I mean, they were definitely the same sort of white cliffs that I remember from England, and I'm originally from England. I'm not totally sure of the 6 other locations around the world, but I have a lot of clues, And I also have a lot of theories, and I hope to eventually work out the location of them all. I think I'm pretty close to finding the location of the place that got named after Tehut, but we'll come to that. So Tehut was clearly well educated already, and he knew things my people, including Ulran, did not know. Tehut and Ulran taught each other much, and they both absorbed knowledge like sponges. Tehut would say that knowledge is the key to greatness, and it is like a light in the darkness. Tahut assisted Ulran formulate the laws of Ulran, including the last law, the most controversial law, which came later, which was a 1 child per person per lifetime law. And that was only because once lifetimes were indefinite, if people were having as many children as their lifetime made possible, that would have made an explosion in the population. Anyway, every time they debated the laws and they came to an agreement, Tahut would carve it into a piece of stone, and then later it would then be carved onto the obelisk of Ulran. And you may have heard about that in a different story when Ulran was overthrown and his obelisk was toppled. But yeah, that's a sad story. Anyway, the stories of the various universities are also very long, so I'm just going to focus on the story of Tehut the man, not Tehut the university or the location, because both the university and the location the university was placed in ended up being called Tehut. Bit confusing, I know, but hey, I didn't make the rules. Tehut founded the Institute of Philosophy and Chemistry. I know it sounds like an unusual combination to us, but in Tantal it was just a natural combination. It was like the Institute of Great Knowledge. And I guess it may have later come to be called alchemy, but we never called it something like that. And he set it up with the help of his wife. Guess who that was? My grandmother. And initially, it was just a part of the great University of Tantal. But as I said before, the universities and the subject matters grew, and 9 out of the 12 universities moved to more convenient locations away from Tantal. Tahut built his university in the mountains near to the old village of Kron. It was at the suggestion of his wife. She loved the mountains near to the original village of Kron, and so an inaccessible location was sought, which was nestled in the mountains, where they would be safe from the crazy primitives who would raid their village in the past. Obviously, the University of Tehut was named after him as the founder. And what a place it was. Peaceful tranquility most of the time. Except when the scientist philosophers got all excited about something, which did happen quite often. And they'd run around and they'd jump about and they'd be like when a rugby team wins a match. It was really quite an amazing feeling to have solved some major problem or come up with some major theory, and they'd all got just so excited. Anyway, about the university, it was nestled in a valley amongst the mountains, and it couldn't be easily reached on foot, and it was chosen for that fact that you couldn't really get to it by foot. There was a path from the university that led up to the top of one of the highest points, which ended up being a lookout point with a large round stone table and stone bench seating. And that is where people would go to do their thinking or discussing or arguing or jumping about excitedly. It had a view of the lake, I think it was, or was it the sea? I think it was the lake. I'm not sure. But I also have a strong feeling that you could only just see the old village of Kron in the distance. But once again, I'm not 100% on that. It's just a vague kind of semi-memory. And the water, whether it was a lake or the sea, it did look a very long way away from that vantage point. But it was a beautiful view, very green area, and it was the whole part, though, both the university and the lookout was very high up. And the lookout, you looked the one way and you saw the water, and you looked the other way and you could see the university buildings. So as I said, most of Tehut was nestled in a gentle sloping valley between the mountains. There were not a lot of buildings and no true pyramids that I can remember, but there was a significant and very large obelisk with a pyramidal base. I'm not 100% sure, but I think most of the university was underground. Most of my memories, however, are from the big stone table with the great views. So I don't have many memories of actually within the university. The place was mainly cut into the rock, the bedrock, but also with a few blocks cut into buildings around the area. And I definitely do not remember any primitives nearby. There were so many potential sites to choose from, but Tahut and Grandma chose that place. The keys to the location of Tahut, if we were to be looking for them today, I would say would be the stone table on top of the hill with a view of water, and the valley nestled between mountains high up, and there are many mountains in this area. Then there would be caves. They were all mainly, I think they were all actually, on one side that went into the mountain where the university was located. And then there would be some stonework buildings on the outside in the valley. And basically they just looked like a very small village, very cute. Wasn't really that much on the outside, mainly inside the mountain. It was very green and lush. Nice weather, but chilly, a little bit chilly. I don't remember any terraces or anything of that sort, but who knows, that could have been added later, I guess. As we get closer to finding the location for the University of Tehut, it also gives me hope for finding Tantal. While doing this whole process, I have made a friend through my channel. His name is Roberto, and he actually lives in that area, and he's been doing a bit of research here and there, and I think that we have identified where the little village of Kron is, and I think we're getting fairly close to identifying the location of Tehut University, and that's really exciting. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you, Roberto. You are amazing. Moving on. As for his wife, our grandmother, she was not just fundamental in the setting up of the University of Tehut, but she was also one of the key people at the great university, and she was a real driving force in much of the work being done. So not just at the University of Tehut, she was consulted on many other things. It probably sounds like there was some sort of family thing going on, but it wasn't just about the family of Ulran. It was about having the best brains available at the time, and Ulran tended to be related to some of the smartest people around. When Tehut moved to South America, I'm assuming it is South America, to set up his university, Ulran would regularly visit. Life at Tehut was amazing, but so was life at all the other universities. And the place of the original place, Kron, was lovely and people would visit there. And then there was Tantal, the big, beautiful city of Tantal. Everything was just wonderful, and the people seemed happy, and there were so many great discoveries and achievements, and there was so much going on. But despite it being so wonderful, it didn't last. And 9,300 years later, there was the overthrow of Ulran. As I said, it went really well for 9,300 years, and it felt like it would never end. There was so much to achieve, to learn, to be happy about, and yet some people were dissatisfied. There's an old saying from Yorkshire about a person who's always dissatisfied, even if things are good, and they won't be happy till their face is in the dirt. And I think that this means that if you are constantly dissatisfied unreasonably, then eventually you will have something to really be unhappy about. And that was the case with the people of Tantal. It didn't happen immediately after Ulran was overthrown. Initially, Bela took over and things did start to change, but it wasn't terrible. It pretty much continued for a while, very similar. But then Bela pulled back some of the universities back to Tantal. Tehut, the location, at that point became independent, and Tehut the person continued to live there, all off and on, until the final deluge. Tehut and his wife didn't return to Tantal much. Instead, they continued at Tehut the location and later went to Kem for a while to assist with some major projects, and then once again returned to Tahut. But that's another story, and I'm going to start at that point in part 2 of the story of Tahut. So I am going to call it a day on this particular episode and continue the story of Tahut very soon. So I hope you enjoyed it so far, because, whenever I think of Tahut, I have a lovely warm feeling about him. He was a really, really lovely man. Not just brilliant, but genuinely lovely. Anyway, that's it for today, so I will catch you all next time. Thanks, bye.